And people would be glad then, would they, that there was no United States superpower? They would think the world was safer if the North Koreans could do that and think that America wouldn't fight. Well, beware of what you want. I think that the president's role models are not presidential. I think that's one of the most attractive things about his writing. His role models are the great leaders of American civil resistance and human rights. People like, of course, Dr. King, but also less likely people like Dorothy Day or Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others. I think those are the people he models himself on. You're not allowed, if you're asked what president you personally would wish to be, you're not allowed to mention Lincoln because it's blasphemous by definition.
Even if you come from
even if you're from Illinois or Hawaii, or it doesn't matter where.
Indonesia,
it doesn't matter where you're from, or from Bali. Yeah. But it's no one would do that any more than they would say Washington or Jefferson. But I'm sure that if he had one, that would be it. And the point about Abraham Lincoln was that all his opponents hugely underestimated him, thought he was a blowhard and a big mouth and an easy talker, but didn't have any real nerve or any real vertebrae. I think that's what we're going to find out, and I think that's what the president is between drags reflecting on.
Yes, and I notice he hasn't taken to pitching Nicorette or other nicotine chewing gums.
But the marvelous the secret of the slenderness is now out.
Yes. Although I was watching the college Final Four basketball where they had this guy shooting relentless three-point shots. I'm sure they did a lot of splicing, but it was quite extraordinary to see a tall, slender man shooting baskets from 25 feet. We have about 15 minutes remaining. I would now like to open up to the floor. Before I do so, of course, I just have a couple of reminders. The first one is a reminder. I think it's fair to say that all the people who are here today came to listen not to me, not to the questioner, but to the panelists. So if you could keep your remarks brief, that would be great. And the second thing I have to say is that because this session is being recorded and you don't have mics, you'll have to excuse me if I rephrase and paraphrase your brief and insightful questions. With those comments, let's start further in the back of the room, the gentleman to my left. That's you. Middle of the room. Sorry, it's a woman in the back of the room. I'm sorry, it's a long way down there.
I understand that on the figures that by 2050, Hispanics are going to be the dominant population in the United States. And that's actually not that far away. So I wondered what the panel's view of the implications of that might be.
Excellent question. So the question was about demography in the US. I think one of the most probably under-known facts about the US is that Latinos are now the largest minority group in the country, not African Americans. Latinos and African Americans typically have had political problems, but Barack Obama won 2/3 of the Latino vote in 2008, helped him win the presidency. If America is becoming a Hispanic country, what does that mean? I guess the question. Anyone want to jump in on this?
Yeah. I find the use of both Hispanic and Latino as portmanteau or all-embracing terms are very misleading. If you go and talk to the Cubans in Miami and then to the El Salvadorans who live in my district, Ward 1 of Washington, D.C., or the Dominicans who live on Long Island, it's true to say that they all have a common language, but that's about the most you can say. The difference between a Mexican and a Guatemalan, for example, very large indeed. White ethnicity is now more or less invisible. No one cares any longer whether someone's from Germany or Poland. It used to matter a hell of a lot there. And with Spanish-speaking American immigrants, these differences are more vivid rather than less. So you beware of aggregating it too much. It's something that needs more disaggregation.
But it is true that there are lots and lots of undocumented workers in the United States, 10 million or so, most of them coming from Mexico, and Mexico is the dominant group in that Latino number. In states like Texas and California, this is already an enormous political reality to become more of one. I know, Don, you spent some time in the Great South and Southwest. What's your sense of the rise of the Spanish-speaking populations in the United States?
I'm really unqualified, totally, even more than usual on this. I didn't know. Is it Rodriguez writes about? He aggregates them as brown, basically. But that's about as far as I could comment. I know there's a certain paranoia about it. Did you pick up in railway stations and places about how everyone's going to be speaking Spanish soon, we'll all be wrecked?
Yes. The point you did touch upon is very significant, which is the resentment felt by black Americans towards this. It's very, very strong, but very strong in Washington. The worst riot there's ever been in Washington while I've been there was when a black police woman told a young Salvadoran man to put down his beer can in front of his peer group. And he wasn't going to be told to do that by any woman, let alone a black one. And then after he'd been handcuffed, she made the mistake of shooting him. Well, that's always a mistake. You know how that upsets people. But there was then, the whole neighborhood was under curfew for several days, and it was pure hatred between black and Hispanic
But Anne,
residents.
I'm sure you'll remember how well Obama did in the racial politics game. He won, I think he won 2/3 of the Asian American votes as well as 2/3 of the Latinos. And a lot of the inside the Beltway types think that if the Democrats can secure the Latino vote, if there is such a thing, leaving aside Cubans in Miami and the like, that's going to make it virtually impossible for Republicans ever to get back the presidency, because those Mountain West states go from being Clint Eastwood gun-toting cowboys to solidly centre-left Latinos. How do you think this demographic change is going to shake out? I mean, obviously Obama is the biggest symbol of it, but there's as the question mentioned, there's a bigger force out there, which is the changing demographics of the country.
Well, it's interesting that Obama has put immigration reform back on the agenda. It's also interesting that George Bush was prepared to run with what some of his own party saw as a far too liberal immigration policy. And George Bush came from Texas. He understood what the pressures were. He understood what it meant politically with the growth in the Hispanic vote, and John McCain too understood that from Arizona. So I think you'll see all those those states along the border that were once, cowboy states, changing quite significantly. And it means that every politician in America has to think about pragmatic ways to deal with its immigration problem, which is, just is so large compared to our tiny problem of boat people arriving.
Yeah, bear in mind, sorry, because it is so interesting, the centre-left assumption may not be as strong as you think. What do we know about these immigrants from Mexico? They want to become members of the American middle class. They have very strong family values. They're much more religious than most, and Catholic too, at that. There's no, things like school vouchers appeal to them a lot. Things like abortion appeal to them hardly at all. They may stay Democratic, but in that case it'll be a different kind of Democratic Party. Yeah,
and it's up to the Republicans, obviously, to manage their nativist anti-immigration concerns, as evidenced by the recent Arizona anti-illegal immigrant bill. Yes, I hope I can now see a gentleman here in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th row.
Could you comment on Rupert Murdoch's attack on the Obama administration through Fox News?
Fox News, it's not all the news that fits to print, it's fair and balanced, I believe, Fox News. So we're living in a 24/7 media cycle where values of sort of old-style values of reporting seem to be less in favour, and instantaneous punditry seems to be the order of the day. And as a real old-school journalist reporter here, how do you feel about that? 24/7 cable news, politicisation of the news? Breaking down the barriers between commentary and news reporting?
Well, I should say Fox News is now the highest rating cable news service during prime time, which I think says it's clearly working for their audience. And I think you have to understand news it's very competitive, and it's partly about entertainment, and it's partly about, carving out a demographic that appeals to advertisers. So I think Fox News have worked out that there's a group in America that really want to hear its message. And the commentators have also been very successful in becoming major players in politics. I mean, they are some of the spokesmen for the Tea Party movement. And it's a